Hey guys, well today we were supposed to see something extraordinary, a double solar illumination at Mission Concepción. Unfortunately, the sun was not playing ball, and so the clouds were too much for light to penetrate, so we didn't get to see it, but we got to hear this beautiful, beautiful lecture on the history of the illumination from Father David. So please, check it out. I hope you enjoy.
6:20, 6:30, there was the clouds opened up and we had the light. So we can continue to pray for that and hope that that happens this evening as well.
Well, you know, we told everybody for the last 3 months to pray for rain. So La Virgen said, I'm going to do this on my feast day. I'm going to answer their prayers on my feast day. So we're turning off the lights. You never can tell because there is a little bit of light coming in from the two windows that are normally the ones that the sun comes in. But what I wanted to do tonight was just give you the context of what we're here for. First of all, I just want to say I'm very impressed and very happy to see all of you all here. There's people here all over. And when we were at the height of this a few years ago, and it had a lot of publicity, there was people that were sitting on the floor all the way through the aisle and around here, and I just told them, don't sit in the middle because then the light will shine on you, and you're not important. And then they sat around the altar, and I said, just don't climb up on the altar because the Virgin is the one that needs to be illuminated. So what I wanted to do tonight was just talk a little bit about, well, what is this all about, and why is tonight so special, and why is Concepcion so special? And this is really an important thing for us to know as San Antonianos and as people who are interested in history, but also interested in our faith. And this is a mixture. What we're doing tonight is to try to understand history, to try to understand the evangelization that the Franciscans brought to the New World, and especially to Texas, and then how buildings furthered what they wanted to do, and that this whole idea of the illumination was for them, and for them to understand a little bit more about Scripture, a little bit more about Jesus, a little bit more about a church, and why we are in a church, why we gather in a church, what's the church all about, etc., so that they could hopefully be converted to the faith and be able to celebrate in the church. So the story starts way back in Europe when the different cathedrals and the different beautiful, I don't know how many of you have been to Europe to see those gorgeous cathedrals. And if you've been in those cathedrals on a sunny day, often you see light coming in all over the place. And they were very strong on building their cathedrals with windows and then what they call clear stories way up at the top, which is places where light would come in and would illuminate their churches in many ways. And then when they invented stained glass, then the illumination would be colorful. So if you ever get a chance to be in any of those churches, especially on a bright sunny day, you'll get the feeling of what I'm talking about. That the light coming in was designed to inspire. And so as you think about those gorgeous cathedrals, and obviously San Fernando is a beautiful cathedral. Here in San Antonio we have one of the most beautiful. I was there for 13 years and I helped to restore it. And so I'm going to take a tiny bit of credit for things like the retablo and things like the ways in which the church is decorated. But it was built along the styles of the Gothic cathedrals of Europe, except for the far part in the back. The back under the dome of San Fernando was the Spanish colonial church. And this is the Spanish colonial church here that we have. Okay, so this is not a Gothic church. Those of you know a little bit about architecture. Gothic churches are built in a whole different way. But what San Fernando was very interesting was when they built it, or when they came in 1731 and built it between 1736 and 1751. They just built a church, I don't know, somewhat similar to this one, maybe about the same size. The original San Fernando, and it was in May Plaza. The Canarios, the people who came to begin San Antonio, the civic settlement of San Antonio, were from the Canary Islands. They were called Canarios, or that doesn't mean birds. In Latin, canes means dog. And when the Spanish conquered the islands, there were a lot of wild dogs in those islands. So we would say the word we would use is perros, so they would have called them Isla de los Perros, but in those days, the Latin canes was more prevalent, and so they called them las Islas Canarias, so the islands of the dogs. And so if you see in the cathedral, the retablo on the right, as you walk into the cathedral, under the dome, you see the gorgeous big gold one in front of you. But then to the right is the retablo of La Virgen de la Candelaria. La Virgen de la Candelaria is from the Canary Islands. She's the Santa Patrona of the Canary Islands, the patron saint of the Canary Islands. But when you see the coat of arms of the Canary Islands, you will see two dogs on both sides, which again is the whole idea of the islands of the dogs. And I tell you all of this because when they founded San Antonio, they made the original church and finished it around 1751 and began to do masses there in the little town of San Antonio de Bejar grew. It was originally called San Fernando. The name of San Antonio was not called San Antonio, it was called San Fernando, and then changed later on, become San Antonio de Bejar. And so basically, that little church was the only church in the town until 1868. Now, meanwhile, south of town is where we are today. The four missions that began was 1731 would be this one, San Juan and Espada. San Jose, down the street a little bit, is 1720. It was a little bit older than here. And the Alamo is San Antonio de Valero, 1718. The founding of the mission San Antonio de Valero. So that's the date that they chose to say that's when San Antonio started. A lot of people argued about that, saying, well, that was the beginning of a mission. It was not necessarily the beginning of a city. And really the city was founded in 1731. So we should be having the 300th anniversary in 2031. And I said, why not do both? I mean, any excuse for a party. As we have said in San Antonio, we're put a party. So basically, that's where the city takes its birthday, 1718. But the Alamo, or San Antonio de Valero, was never finished. It should have had two towers and all kinds of other things, and it never got finished. And then, of course, the battle happened, and so that was kind of the end of that whole idea of the mission as a church. But these four flourished. Meanwhile, San Antonio was growing. And when San Antonio got to 1868, they decided to make it a diocese and send a bishop. And so they said, we can't just have this little bitty church, in the center of this town, and we have a bishop coming, so we got to make a cathedral. So they started thinking, what is the cathedral going to look like? And it's a very, very interesting situation. They tore down the equivalent of, for this church, everything from here to the front door at the cathedral in San Fernando. They tore all of that down and just kept the part that was under the dome. So the part that's under the dome is the original downtown. And the part from here that was torn down is where they created a new church, the Gothic church. And the Gothic church was patterned after Notre Dame of Paris. You know, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, the one that burned a few years ago, as you know, but has now been, they're redoing it and rebuilding it. So it is a very interesting cathedral, Spanish colonial under the dome in the back where the retablos are, and French Gothic in the main part of the church, with all those beautiful stained glass windows and light coming in on a beautiful sunny day. So the whole idea of light, and this is my point, light was very important for people entering the church and being bathed in light. Why? Because to enter into a church, a Gothic church, the idea was that you should be tasting heaven. Tasting heaven. In other words, you go in and it's, wow, look at this. And your eyes go up and you see a painted ceiling and you see stained glass and you see brilliant light coming in, and maybe you see the statues and the beautiful soaring arches. In fact, the arches at San Fernando are peaked arches. They're not rounded arches. Like this is a rounded arch. Peaked arches kind of say, point you up to heaven. Look at heaven. Think of heaven as you come in here. So the idea of the church is in building those beautiful Gothic cathedrals was, we want to give you a taste of where you're going. You're walking in the front door and you have this wow experience, and the wow experience is, God, this is beautiful. This is heaven. This is a taste of heaven. And you gotta behave yourself so you go to heaven. That's the whole idea. Okay? And the idea is you're walking in the front door and you have this long aisle until you get all the way to the sanctuary and the altar. And the long aisle is a representation of your journey of faith. So you're walking through your journey of faith. You're on a peregrinación. You're on a pilgrimage through life. And where do you want to go? You want to go to union with the altar, union with the community of the church that gathers around the altar, union with the Eucharist, union with Jesus. That's the whole idea. So that's kind of the ideas of churches. So when the Spanish came and started building these churches, there was a bit of a problem, because the Spanish were trying to convert the Indians, the Native Americans. Now the Native Americans didn't have buildings in this part of the Southwest. Now, of course, the Aztecs had the pyramids and things like that, but the Native Americans here did not. And so for them, they lived, sleeping under the stars, and maybe they had tents in the wintertime, but there was no real idea of buildings. But the other thing that the Native Americans had that the Franciscans discovered was, because they lived in the environment, they were always looking at the stars, and they were looking at the sun, and they were looking at, the clouds and the rain. They were very much in touch with nature. And that part was what the Franciscans said, okay, how can we get them to understand Christ, first of all, because we want them to be converted to Christ, and then how can we get them to gather around the Eucharistic table, around the table of the Lord that we gather as a church, because that is critical. That is where the church is at its best, around the altar, around the table of the Lord, around the Eucharist. When we're receiving communion, we're gathering for Mass. So they didn't want to come into the church. They were a little bit afraid of the church. Okay, so the idea then was, why don't we capture something that they're familiar with and something that they almost worship, and in many cases did worship, which was the sun. Now, if you go throughout the Southwest and you go into caves where the indigenous, the Native Americans, painted, you go to the Pueblo Indians, you go to the Arizona Indians, you go to the California areas, everywhere you go, you're going to find among the paintings of the indigenous peoples images of the sun. Images of the sun. So for many of them, the sun was like God. And the moon was like God as well. The sun was more important because the sun was bigger. The sun was the one that ruled during the day. They knew they needed the sun for their crops when they grew crops. they knew that the sun was critical, and so the sun was, in effect, worshipped and very important. So then the Franciscans thought, what if we could capture the sun and put the sun inside the church? And then that way, the natives would see the sun, which was always very important to them, and they would want to then go in. And that's what this is all about, what we're gathering about today. Gathering about the idea that they were able to plan a church like this one. And by the way, this is one of the more unique ones. In California, I think there's 14 missions that have a solar illumination. But I think all of them only have what we call a single illumination, meaning it comes in over one window, like the window over the main door. It maybe illuminates the tabernacle, maybe it illuminates one of the saints, maybe the patron saint, maybe under the dome like ours, but it's only one. Concepcion has two. Concepcion has this one and one of the windows of the dome. At the same time, you may have heard at 6:30, which is coming up fairly soon. Thank you, Mary, for the clouds. Thank you, Mary, for the rain. So we're probably not going to see what they had planned, but we're going to imagine, and we're going to reflect on it. We're going to pray about it. So the idea was that in the beautiful South Texas sun of August, you would have a beam of light coming in over the door, the one which is the ocular beam, the ocular window over there, and it's created in such a way that if you notice, you want to just turn around and look at it right now, it is got a very small opening for the window, but then it has a much larger opening as the light comes in. So you can see there'd be a small amount of light coming in, but then as it enters, it enlarges. It enlarges to fill the amount of space of the way that it is fashioned there. So you have a much wider circle, even though you have a smaller window. And so that was done on purpose, so you could concentrate and figure on the light coming in, and that light comes in right under the dome. Why is that important under the dome? Because the second light comes in here and illuminates the face of Mary. And Mary is the patron of this church, her under the title of La Inmaculada Concepción, the Immaculate Conception. Today is not the Feast of Immaculate Conception, today is the Feast of the Assumption. It's another feast of Mary. Okay, so we have two feasts. So now, what was the whole idea of the beam of light coming in under the dome? Why is that important? Because churches often in those days, and still some churches today, are made in the form of a cross. So you have the long part of the cross coming here, and then you have the cross being here. Where do they meet? They meet right under the dome. And so the idea would be then that the illumination coming in from this particular window would illuminate the center of the cross. Who's on the center of the cross, of course, is Jesus. And that's the focus of what they wanted the indigenous peoples to understand. That Jesus is the important one, and that Jesus is light. He is the light of the world. In many, many cases, over and over, we see that as important. When does Jesus rise from the dead? It says, very early in the morning, as the sun was rising, the women went to the tomb. As the sun was rising. Why is the church, many churches traditionally, are on an east-west axis? That's the west, that's the east. The east is where the sun comes up. So all of you right now are facing the east. In the sense, this is the position of prayer. The Muslims do this, but they face Mecca, okay? And that's when they pray facing Mecca. And in fact, even when they bury their dead facing Mecca. Whereas the tradition has been that the congregation faces the east, which is the rising sun, which is the symbol of the risen Lord, the symbol of Christ, and so that is the way we face. In the old days, the priest also faced east. Those of you that are old enough that have gray hair like me, you can remember when the priest faced that way too. And all you saw was the back of the priest. He was also facing the sun, the rising sun. Okay, today we have where the priest faces the people with a gesture of we are all gathering around the table. And the priest is the one that leads us, but you all are still facing east. Now, that's not necessarily true of all the churches today. Churches today are facing in many different directions, but the traditional way was a cross, like this, and facing east. Now, Espada is a mission, the very last mission, beautiful little mission. They have a single illumination, and that illumination is on October the 4th, the feast of San Francisco, St. Francis. And the name of the church is San Francisco de la Espada. Okay? In fact, a lot of people say, why is it called Espada? Espada is a sword. San Francisco, St. Francis is, you can think of him as a saint of peace, and the saint where, he loved the animals and he loved all creation and everything. And they think there has something to do with the whole idea of conquering not only the indigenous people, but also the pushing the Muslims out of Spain. But at any rate, San Francisco de la Espada is the name of that parish that has a single illumination on his feast day, but the church is facing west. And so, because the church faces west, the sun comes up in the east and it illuminates the face of St. Francis, which is the statue over the altar, and it illuminates it in the morning. We have an afternoon illumination because we're facing east and the sun is setting. So the sun is setting and looking towards the east, but the sun is in the west. So it's that little idea of the way that they decided they were going to build churches in those days. I'm going to talk a little bit more. Then what I would like to do is because we're not getting the light that we were hoping for, we're going to maybe just do a little bit of a meditation with some music in a few minutes. And I just want you all to try to imagine, how many of you, raise your hands, have been here and seen the illumination in previous years? Okay, some. Not even the majority. So I'm very happy that the majority of you have never been here before. I'm a little bit sad that you're not going to see the illumination, but I want you to imagine it and put yourself into the role of a person who was inquiring, a person who was interested, a person who was being told about Jesus, but had never really heard this and had never really understood it, and coming into the church and then seeing this fantastic illumination happening double. So like I say, Espada is a single, and Concepción is a double illumination, which is extremely rare. I don't think any of the California missions, and there's a few in Mexico that may have a double illumination. So the other thing I was going to say, this whole idea of the sun, when you leave today, if you turn around as you leave the church and look up, the front of Concepción has a chalice over the front door, a chalice carved over the front door. That chalice has a consecrated host on it. You know, the idea of the chalice and the host above it. But the host, which we of course use for communion, the host looks like a sunburst. One way back in the back, okay? Somebody stand up and ask your question.
Me?
On the far right, yes.
I just had a question. Was this always in the same location as it is today? Like, is a painting the origin?
Painting?
Yes.
Okay, that painting is not the original painting. There would have been another one there at the time. This painting dates probably from the late 1800s, and this mission, of course, dates from the middle 1700s. So there would have been something else there, and because the name of the mission was Concepción, it would have been probably a painting of Mary at the time. That one was lost. The oldest painting here in this church is right there. It's a very dark one of St. Francis of Assisi, and it comes from 1691. So it's probably one of the oldest paintings of any church in San Antonio. And when you say, wait a minute, 1691, the church didn't get built until 1751. Well, they rolled it up in the knapsack, you see, and brought it. So it had been already painted in Mexico. And they were coming from different conventos, which were in Querétaro and Zacatecas, and they were coming up here to begin the missions. So they would bring certain artwork with them, and they would just roll up the canvas, and then later on they would frame it and put it in the church. So this St. Francis one is really the oldest that we have in any of the missions, and probably in the Archdiocese. 1691. This picture, the other pointing is Virgen de Guadalupe, 1750. Again, not original to this church, but a gorgeous picture that came from one of the haciendas in central Mexico. We were able to get it through an art dealer here in San Antonio who got it originally. So it's a very beautiful painting. Today I was in the Latin American collection in Austin, the Benson Library. I don't know how many of you have gone there. They have a beautiful Latin American collection. They were showing us some of the oldest manuscripts that they have from the 1600s and the 1700s, talking about different things in history and different people who were writing history. So I was very moved by that. And they had an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe in one of the manuscripts from the 1600s. Around and look at that and realize that even in the artwork, they were trying to give the Native Americans, look, this is Jesus. We believe this is Jesus in the host. This is really the Messiah. This is really the Son of God. And it's a sunburst. In other words, it's a way of the indigenous people seeing him as God, since they revered the sun as their most important image and their most important gods, as they had many, many gods. They had gods of the sun and moon and rain and stars and things like that. And I just want to say that the reason all of this happened is because the Franciscans and the others, the conquistadores and the Indians themselves, when they would move, when they would walk, when they would be changing from place to place, they many times would follow the stars at night because of the constellations. They knew how to read them. They knew how to interpret them, and they knew how to be guided by the constellations. And then during the day, when the way the sun would come up and go down, they understood that as well. And so they were people of the land, and they were people that were very much in touch with all of nature. And because of that, and the Franciscans knew that too, I think they were able to actually figure out where do we put the windows, so that on a particular day at a particular time, and we want it to be on the day of the Feast of Mary, that the sun will come in and illuminate what we want it to illuminate, which is the cross on the ground and the face of Mary over the altar.